The wind howled like a wounded animal as Sarah Ahmed wiped down the last table at Golden Spoon Diner, her 25-year-old hands trembling slightly from exhaustion rather than cold. The old building creaked and groaned against the fierce January storm that had turned Highway 21 into a frozen wasteland. Through the frost-covered windows, she could barely make out the road where abandoned cars sat like forgotten toys in the snow. "Sarah, honey, you should head home before this gets any worse," called Tommy from behind the kitchen counter, his weathered face full of worry. At 70 years old, he'd seen plenty of harsh Texas winters, but nothing quite like this. "I can't leave you here alone, Tommy. Besides, my apartment is just as cold as this place." She managed a tired smile, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. The truth was, she simply could not miss even one shift, not with the diner barely surviving and her mother's hospital bills growing faster than the snow outside. The bell above the door rang hard as it was pushed open against the wind, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a man in a $2,000 coat that was now completely soaked. He stumbled inside, followed by another equally well-dressed figure, then another. "Is this place even open?" The first man shook the snow from his dark hair, revealing sharp features and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. His steel-gray eyes scanned the simple diner with visible distaste. "Kitchen closes in 10 minutes, Sarah replied, picking up a stack of menus. Something about his tone immediately put her on edge. "But given the storm, I suppose we can stay open a little longer." "We are not here by choice, sweetheart." His voice had the unmistakable edge of a man used to being obeyed. "Our cars are all stuck in the snow, every single one." More men in expensive suits began filing through the door, each one shaking off snow and looking more out of place with every step. Sarah counted quickly. 17 total. 17 men who looked like they belonged in glass office towers, not a small roadside diner that had not been renovated since the 1990s. "I am Daniel Knox," answered the first man, as if the name should mean something to her. When Sarah's expression remained politely blank, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Knox Ventures, Austin's largest private investment firm." "I'm Sarah Ahmed, and this is the Golden Spoon Diner. Nice to meet you." Her tone was polite, but completely unimpressed. She had learned long ago that money did not automatically earn respect. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. He was not used to people who did not recognize his name. There was something about this woman, he thought. She carried herself with quiet dignity despite her worn uniform and tired eyes. "We need a place to stay for the night," said another man, this one with perfectly combed silver hair and a watch that cost more than most people earned in a year. Tommy came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Well, gentlemen, this ain't the Hilton, but you're more than welcome to wait out the storm. Sarah, get these folks some coffee and whatever's left from dinner." "I already tried calling ahead to the hotels in town," Daniel said, cutting in and pulling out his phone. "No signal, nothing works. Cell tower went down about an hour ago. Storm knocked out the landlines, too. Happens out here every few years." Sarah watched as the reality of the situation settled over the group. These were clearly men who were used to having every problem solved with a phone call or a credit card. Being genuinely stuck in a snowstorm with no options was completely foreign to them. "So what exactly do you suggest we do?" Daniel's tone had shifted from annoyance to something closer to real concern. "I suggest you settle in," Sarah replied calmly, already moving toward the coffee machine, "because unless you plan to walk 15 miles through a blizzard in those leather shoes, you are spending the night here." One of the younger men laughed nervously. "She cannot be serious. There has to be another option. A motel, anything." "Nearest motel is the Lone Star Lodge, 12 miles north, but Route 7 is completely blocked. State Patrol is calling it the worst storm in 30 years. Sarah began filling coffee cups with practiced ease, quietly watching the group as she worked. They were all clearly very successful men, used to first-class everything. And now here they were, stuck in a small roadside diner with mismatched chairs and a jukebox that only played country songs from the 90s. "This is absolutely unacceptable," muttered a man with a British accent. "I have a board meeting first thing tomorrow morning." "We all have places to be," Daniel said sharply. But his eyes kept drifting to Sarah as she moved between the tables. There was something about the way she handled all of this. No panic, no drama, just quiet, steady competence. He found it genuinely refreshing. "Coffee is fresh," Sarah announced, setting full cups in front of everyone. "We have leftover chili, some sandwiches, and Tommy makes a great peach pie. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and it's real." "How much?" Daniel asked, already reaching for his wallet. Sarah paused for a moment, studying him for a moment. "For coffee during a life-threatening storm? It is called hospitality, Mr. Knox. I was not planning to charge you for basic human decency." A few of the men exchanged glances. They were not accustomed to generosity without an angle, especially from someone who clearly needed the money herself. "That is very kind," Daniel said carefully, "but we are happy to pay for—" "You can pay by not treating this place like it is beneath you," Sarah replied evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "We may not have marble floors or fancy chandeliers, but we have better coffee than most places in Austin and enough heart to help strangers on the worst night of the year." The only sound that followed was the wind shaking the windows. Daniel felt something he was not expecting. Shame. When was the last time someone had spoken to him so plainly and so correctly? "You're right," he admitted quietly, surprising himself and the men around him. "Thank you for your hospitality, Sarah." She nodded once, accepting his apology gracefully. "I'll start on those sandwiches. Tommy, can you help me set up some sleeping spots in the back?" "Sleeping spots?" The silver-haired man looked alarmed. "You're not sleeping in your cars in freezing temperatures," Sarah practically said. "We have some folding cots in the storage room, and the heating back here is better than anywhere else in town tonight." As Sarah disappeared into the kitchen with Tommy, the 17 men sat in stunned silence. They had gone from luxury cars to a small roadside diner, from five-star hotel expectations to folding cots. And somehow, this young woman with kind eyes and a sharp tongue had made it all seem not just acceptable, but almost perfectly reasonable. "She's got real spine," someone murmured with clear admiration. Daniel found himself nodding, still looking at the kitchen door. In 40 years of life, he had met countless people who either feared him or wanted something from him. Sarah Ahmed was the first person in a very long time who seemed to see him as simply a person, a rude person who needed coffee and a warm place to sleep, nothing more and nothing less. The evening passed in an atmosphere none of them had expected. Sarah and Tommy worked without stopping to make their unexpected guests comfortable. They set up the cots, kept the coffee coming, and somehow managed to feed 17 hungry men with whatever food remained in the kitchen. Daniel watched it all with growing fascination. Every interaction he had ever had with service workers was transactional, polite and efficient, but always about money exchanging hands. This was completely different. Sarah moved through the diner as if she genuinely cared about their comfort. She asked about food preferences, made sure everyone had enough blankets, and even tuned the old radio until she found something better to listen to. "You really don't have to do all this," he told her as she refilled his cup for the 4th time around midnight. "It's not all that much. It's just what you do for people." "Even strangers? People who could be anyone for all you know?" Sarah tilted her head slightly, looking at him. "Are you dangerous?" "Well, some of us are in investment banking, so that's debatable." The small smile that crossed Sarah's face in that moment meant more to him than any business deal he had closed all year. "I'll take my chances with investment bankers over freezing to death in a blizzard."
"You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I don't know. Someone more impressed by who we are, maybe. More intimidated." "Money doesn't change the fact that you're stuck in a snowstorm, just like everyone else," Sarah said gently. "Tonight, you're just Daniel, and you needed help. Everything else is just noise." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. When was the last time someone had called him just Daniel and meant it? When had anyone last treated him like an ordinary human being? "What about you?" he asked. "What's your story, Sarah Ahmed?" Something crossed her face too quickly to fully read, but unmistakably guarded. "Not much to tell. Grew up near here, work here, trying to keep this place going." "College?" That single word carried a weight that suggested a much more complex truth beneath it. No time for that kind of thinking. Before Daniel could ask anything else, Tommy's voice boomed from across the diner. "Sarah, coffee machine's acting up again." "Duty calls," she said, already moving away. Daniel watched her go, struck by how she carried herself with such natural grace despite her obvious exhaustion. There was a real story there. He could feel it, and for the first time in years, he found himself genuinely curious about another person. The night stretched on, and slowly the whole atmosphere shifted. These powerful men, stripped of their usual comfort and control, began talking to each other like actual human beings. Stories were shared, real ones. Jokes were made, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, Sarah found herself genuinely laughing at something the British investor said about his very first week in America. "You know," said Marcus Lim, a tech billionaire from California, "this is the most honest conversation I've had in months. No profit margins, no quarterly reports, just people." "That's because you're not in your usual environment," Sarah observed, sitting for a moment with her own coffee. No assistants filtering everything, no agendas, just people being people. "Very philosophical for 2 in the morning, Daniel said, but his tone was warm rather than mocking. "Tommy says I think too much, occupational hazard of the night shift." Sarah met Daniel's eyes across the table. "You notice a lot when people don't think you're paying attention." "Meaning service workers are invisible to people like us." "I didn't say that," but the look in her eyes said she didn't have to. Daniel felt the weight of that truth settle on him. How many people just like Sarah had he walked past without ever truly seeing? How many people had refilled his coffee without him once asking their name? "That's probably true, and probably wrong of us." Sarah studied him quietly. "Probably." As dawn approached and the storm finally began to ease, Sarah made breakfast for all 17 men. Scrambled eggs, buttered toast, crispy bacon, and the best coffee Daniel had ever tasted in his life. The conversation had grown real and warm, and now there was a genuine ease among them that felt almost surreal. "This has been—" Daniel struggled to find the right words as he prepared to leave. "Expensive?" Sarah suggested, with a small, dry smile. "Life-changing," he finished seriously. Sarah's smile softened slightly. She had seen that look on wealthy men before, that mix of gratitude and something else, something she needed to keep at a careful distance.
"Safe drive back to Austin, Mr. Knox." The formal address was deliberate. It drew a clear line. Daniel felt it immediately. "Daniel," he corrected gently. "After a night like this, I think we've moved past Mr. Knox." "Take care of yourself, Daniel," Sarah said quietly, already turning back to the morning work. He wanted to say more, but the others were already heading out, and the real world was reasserting itself. He was a trillionaire. She was a diner waitress. Whatever had happened in the warmth of that snowstorm was beautiful, but perhaps temporary, like the snow already beginning to melt on the highway. And yet, as he walked to his car, Daniel Knox could not shake the feeling that he was leaving something genuinely important behind. 3 weeks later, Sarah was still trying to make sense of what had happened to her quiet life. The morning after the storm, when 135 luxury cars had appeared outside the Golden Spoon diner, she honestly thought she was seeing things from exhaustion. Reporters, cameras, and strangers had followed within hours, turning her simple workplace into something unrecognizable.
The story had gone viral overnight. Everyone wanted to know about the waitress who had opened her doors to 17 of the world's wealthiest men in a blizzard. The business had exploded, but Sarah felt overwhelmed rather than grateful. "Order up," Tommy called from the kitchen. His arthritis was clearly getting worse, and Sarah worried about him every single day now. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up from a table. Her breath caught. Daniel Knox stood in the doorway, looking just as composed as he had 3 weeks ago, but something in his expression was different now. Less armor, more uncertainty. "Mr. Knox," she said politely, finishing her current table before walking over. "Something like that." His smile was careful. "I was hoping we could talk." "I'm working," she said it kindly but clearly, "but I can seat you if you'd like." He glanced around the full diner. People were already staring and pulling out their phones. "Somewhere a little more private, maybe?" "This is a diner, not a members club," Sarah said evenly. "If you need privacy, Austin has plenty of places that might suit you better." "That came out wrong," Daniel said quickly. "I meant the attention. It must be difficult for you, all of this sudden exposure." Sarah studied his face for a moment. She was looking for the condescension she'd grown used to from reporters and curious customers. Instead, she found something that looked like genuine concern. "It has been a lot, but good for business." He gestured to a corner table that had just opened. "5 minutes, please." Against her better judgment, Sarah sat across from him, very aware that half the diner was watching. "You didn't speak to any reporters," Daniel observed. "Most people would have. Book deals, interviews, sponsorships." "What happened that night was private," Sarah said simply. "It wasn't meant for anyone else." "That's exactly what I mean." Then more carefully, "I also want to say that I had no right to look into your personal situation the way I did. Your finances, your mother's medical bills. I should have simply asked you how you were doing, not run a background check." Sarah's expression went very still. "You had me investigated." "I know how that sounds. In my world, it is standard practice, but that is not an excuse. I was wrong. I treated you like a problem to be assessed, rather than a person." The honesty in his voice stopped her from standing up and walking away. "You think you need saving," she said quietly. "No," replied Daniel. "I think I needed to understand why someone like you exists, someone who gives without calculating the return. I don't encounter that often. Honestly, I'm not sure I ever have before." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "Why does it matter to you what I think of you?" "I genuinely don't know," he answered. "That's what's been keeping me up at night." Something stirred in Sarah's chest that she did not have a name for yet. Something she had promised herself she could not afford. "I can't be your project, Daniel," she said carefully. "I'm not looking for a project. I'm looking for a reason to be better than I've been. And I think that reason walked away from me 3 weeks ago in a diner apron." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "No investigators, no research, no background checks. If you want to talk to me, you talk to me. Just 2 people. Nothing else." "Agreed. Starting now." Sarah almost smiled. Starting now. 2 days later, Daniel called. "Hello?" he asked the moment she picked up. "Hello to you too." "Sorry. Hello, Sarah. How are you? Would you like to have lunch with me?" Sarah smiled beside herself. "Better. Yes, but I choose the place." "Deal." Fatima's Kitchen, small Pakistani restaurant 15 minutes from here. Nothing fancy, but the biryani will change your life. "Sounds perfect. Should I wear a suit?" "Absolutely not, and you pay your own bill." Daniel laughed, warm and completely unguarded. "Yes, ma'am." Fatima's Kitchen was exactly what Sarah had promised. Small, unpretentious, and run by a grandmother whose recipes had been passed down through 3 generations. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early in dark jeans and a simple shirt. He looked, Sarah thought, when she walked in, like a completely different person from the man who had stumbled into the diner in a $1,000 coat. "You look beautiful," he said when she slid into the booth across from him. "Thank you," she said simply, "and you look almost normal." He laughed. "I'll take it." Their conversation found its rhythm quickly. Daniel had worried they would have nothing to talk about beyond the storm. Instead, he discovered that Sarah was one of the most interesting people he had ever sat across from. She spoke about literature, about community, about what she saw in people every single day from behind that diner counter. Her observations were sharp and completely unpretentious. "You studied finance," he said at one point. It was not really a question. Sarah's hand paused over her food. "What makes you say that?" "The way you talk about the diner's margins, the way you understood exactly what I was suggesting with the check I sent and why it was wrong. You know the language." She was quiet for a moment. "University of Texas, finance and economics. I had to leave before I finished." "What happened?" "Life," she said simply. "My father got sick, then my mother. I came home and I never went back. By the time things settled, the moment had passed." Daniel felt the weight of that. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I found something at the diner I might not have found anywhere else. I learned what actually matters." She looked at him directly. "What about you? Did you always want to do what you do?" "I wanted to be an architect. I used to draw buildings constantly as a kid. Whole cities." His voice shifted slightly. "My father died when I was 19. I figured out very quickly that dreams don't pay medical bills." "So you chose money over everything else?" "I chose survival, and then I just kept going until survival became an empire, and I forgot to ask whether I still actually wanted it." Sarah studied him across the table. "And now?" "Now I'm sitting in a Pakistani restaurant in Texas, talking to the most honest person I have ever met, and I'm starting to remember what wanting something real feels like." The warmth in Sarah's chest grew into something she could no longer ignore. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. "I have to take this," she said quickly. "It's the hospital. My mother." "I'll drive you," Daniel said immediately, already standing. "I don't have to," Daniel said, simply. "Let me."
The drive to Austin Medical Center was mostly silent. Sarah sat rigid, staring at the window, while Daniel navigated the streets quickly and calmly. "She's going to be okay," he said quietly as they pulled in. "You don't know that." "No," he admitted. "But whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone tonight." Sarah looked at him then, really looked, and saw something in his face that made her chest tighten. Not performance, not strategy, just genuine, quiet care. An hour later, Sarah came back from the ward looking exhausted, but relieved. "She's stable, a reaction to new medication. They're keeping her overnight, but the doctor says she'll be fine." Thank God. Daniel meant it completely. "You waited," Sarah said. "Of course. You didn't have to." "I know," he said simply. "I wanted to." Something gave way inside Sarah then. A wall she had built carefully and maintained for years. This man had sat in a hospital waiting room for over an hour for someone he had just begun to know, simply because it was the right thing to do. She was about to speak when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned and felt the blood drain from her face. The man walking toward them was tall, impeccably dressed, with the particular polished confidence of someone who had always had money and always would. And Sarah knew him. She had once loved him. "Ryan Knox," the man said, smiling in a way that never reached his eyes. "What a small world." Daniel's expression closed immediately. "Ryan." "Sarah Elizabeth Siddiqui," Ryan said,
his voice carrying the sharp pleasure of someone who enjoys surprising people. "Or are you going by Ahmed these days? Charming." Daniel looked between them. "You know each other?" "We were engaged," Ryan said, smoothly. 3 years ago, before her family lost their business, before she disappeared rather than face what came next. "That is not what happened," Sarah said quietly, her voice completely steady despite everything she was feeling. "Isn't it?" Ryan's smile sharpened. "Perhaps she should tell Daniel here the full story about who you really are, about how his investment in my acquisition 3 years ago is exactly why you're serving coffee for a living." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel looked at Sarah slowly. She could see the pieces connecting in his mind. "Sarah Elizabeth Siddiqui," he said softly. "Siddiqui Properties, the acquisition." "The very same," Ryan confirmed, looking deeply satisfied. Sarah watched Daniel's face move through shock and then through something that looked like real pain. "You knew who I was, and you never said anything." "Daniel, I can explain." "Can she?" Ryan said pleasantly. "She's been playing the humble waitress while hiding who she really is. It's quite a performance." "That is enough," Daniel said sharply. He turned back to Sarah. "I need some air." Sarah stepped out first, walking to the parking lot and sitting on a bench in the cool night. A few minutes later, Daniel came and sat beside her. "Just one question. Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Because I was afraid you would look at me like you're looking at me now, like I was hiding something from you on purpose, like I couldn't be trusted." "Were you?" "No." Clear and immediate. "That night at the diner, I had no idea who you were. When you introduced yourself, I recognized the name, but I didn't connect it to what happened to my family until days later. And by then I was already starting to trust you, which terrified me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't care who your family was. I don't care about the money or the name or any of it. The woman I have come to know, the one who fed strangers in a blizzard and stayed on her feet all night to make sure everyone was warm, that is who you are. Everything else is just history." "But your investment helped him take everything from my family." "I backed a deal I didn't properly investigate, and I think Ryan gave me fraudulent information to make it happen. If that's true, then I owe you more than an apology." Sarah felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in 3 years. "I'm so tired of running from all of it." "Then stop. Stop running. Fight instead. And let me fight with you." Sarah looked at him, this man who had waited, who had come back, who was sitting beside her on a hospital parking lot bench and asking her to trust him one more time. "Okay," she said. "But I need to tell you something else. My mother doesn't know who I really am. After everything collapsed, I couldn't face her knowing how blind I had been. So I became Sarah Ahmed, and I've been sending money for her treatments without telling her it's from me." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said gently, "She's going to know soon, but when she does, she's going to see exactly what I see. Someone who survived losing everything and kept going anyway. Someone who took care of the people she loves without asking for anything back. That's not something to be ashamed of, Sarah. That's remarkable." She leaned against him slightly, and he didn't move away. "You're not alone in this anymore," he said quietly. "Whatever comes next, we figure it out together."
3 weeks later, the truth came out. Daniel's legal team uncovered evidence that Ryan had provided false financial documents to secure the investment. Fraudulent records, forged signatures, $3 million redirected from her family's employee accounts into private holdings. They confronted Ryan in a law firm conference room. He arrived expecting routine negotiations and found Sarah sitting beside Daniel, composed and ready. "You destroyed real people," Sarah told him calmly. "Employees who trusted my father, people who had spent their whole careers building something. You took their retirement savings. For what?" Ryan's polished confidence cracked piece by piece as Daniel's lawyers laid out every document, every transfer, every lie. By the end, his face was the color of ash. "I never meant it for it to go that far," he said, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever said. "The Financial Crimes Unit will be in contact with you. You have a choice between full cooperation and the full weight of what you've done. I suggest you think carefully." After Ryan was escorted out, Sarah sat quietly in the conference room for a long moment. Daniel sat beside her. "How are you doing?" "I keep thinking about who I was 3 years ago, so certain of everything, so completely unprepared for any of it." "Do you regret being trusting?" Sarah thought about that carefully. "No. I regret being wrong about Ryan, but I don't regret being someone who believes in people. That's what brought me to you, after all." Daniel took her hand. A month later, they sat together in Fatima's kitchen, their table, the same corner booth, evening light coming through the small window. "There's something I want to ask you," Daniel said. He reached into his jacket and set a small velvet box on the table between them. Sarah looked at it, then at him. "I know it's fast. I know everything about this is complicated and the world is watching and none of it is simple. But Sarah, I have spent my entire adult life accumulating things that didn't matter, and the moment I walked into a snowstorm and a tired waitress looked at me like I was just a person, something changed that I cannot change back." He opened a box. A simple, beautiful diamond caught the soft evening light. "I love you," he said. "I love your honesty and your strength and the way you see people clearly and treat them well anyway. I want to spend the rest of my life being the kind of man you looked at on that terrible night and decided was worth helping. Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at the ring for a long moment, then at him. "Are you absolutely sure? Because marrying me means all of it. The story, the complications, the fact that your wife used to serve chili at midnight for a living." "Sarah," Daniel said quietly, "I fell in love with the woman who served the chili. Everything else is a gift." "Yes," she said softly, smiling through unexpected tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring under her finger, Sarah thought about what Tommy had said to her once, many months ago in the kitchen of the Golden Spoon Diner. Sometimes the world surprises you. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a sunlit room in her family's restored home, adjusting her grandmother's earrings for the third time. Through the window, she could see the garden where her mother sat talking with guests, looking healthier and more peaceful than she had in years. All the medical bills were gone. The house was theirs again, and her mother now knew everything, the whole truth, and had held her face in her hands and said only, "I am so proud of you." Tommy knocked and entered in a rented suit that he wore with complete dignity. Daniel had asked Tommy to walk Sarah down the aisle, and she could not imagine anyone else in that role. "Ready, sweetheart?" asked Tommy. "More than I've ever been ready for anything," Sarah said. The ceremony was simple and true. Daniel stood at the end of the aisle looking like a man who had just understood something important for the first time. When Sarah reached him, his expression was everything she needed to see.
"You're beautiful," he said. "You're not bad yourself," she replied. They had written their own vows. "Sarah," Daniel said, steady and clear, I thought I understood what I was building my life toward. Then you handed me a cup of coffee in a snowstorm and reminded me that the most valuable things in this world cannot be bought, cannot be structured into a deal, and cannot be planned. You taught me that kindness is its own kind of power, that seeing people is a choice, that love is the only investment that never loses its value. I promise to stand beside you, to learn from you, and to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know you are seen. Sarah took a breath. Daniel, 6 months ago, I had convinced myself that the best I could do was survive quietly and hope no one looked too closely. Then you walked into the diner in a ruined coat with snow in your hair, and somehow, underneath all that expensive armor, I saw a person who was just as lost as I was. You didn't rescue me. You stood beside me while I remembered how to rescue myself. I promise to love you honestly, to challenge you when you need it, and to always make sure there is excellent coffee in our house. The laughter that followed was warm and real. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said. Daniel cupped Sarah's face gently. I love you, Mrs. Knox. I love you, Mr. Knox, Sarah replied, and kissed him. The reception was held in the garden as evening settled in and the first stars appeared. Sarah and Daniel danced slowly under strings of warm light, and Sarah thought about the distance between that midnight in a snowstorm and that how strange and beautiful the path between them had been. Any regrets? Daniel asked quietly. Not a single one, Sarah said. You? Only that it took a blizzard to put me somewhere I had no control so I could finally meet someone real. Later, near the end of the evening, Tommy appeared beside Sarah with a glass of sweet tea and a look of pure, quiet satisfaction. You were right, she told him. About which part? About the world surprising you. Tommy smiled. Always does, if you let it. Sarah looked out at the garden full of people. She thought about a young woman alone in a diner at midnight, a door forced open by wind and snow, 17 cold, proud, powerful strangers who became for one long winter night just people who needed help. She thought about how everything she had lost had turned out to be making room for this. Daniel appeared at her side and put his arm around her, warm and steady, entirely hers. Happy? Daniel asked. More than I knew how to want, Sarah said honestly. He kissed her hair. Good, because this is just the beginning. And it was. Because sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest ones. A door opened in a storm, a cup of hot coffee passed across a counter, a choice to see the person in front of you rather than looking past them. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the snowstorm that seems like it will ruin everything turns out to be exactly the thing that saves you.